Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I am Gibbon.
At the beginning of this season of the Kongversation, Dustin and I discussed our first impressions on the Switch remake of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and I was surprised at how much I actually enjoyed the remake, given my historically spotty feelings toward the Game Boy Advance original. Now, Dustin, on the other hand, he seemed to have a miserable go with it. And that is documented on the 3 Idaho crew streams that they did playing through the remake for Mario vs. Donkey Kong. And all of those are now available to watch on our YouTube channel. Now, also on our YouTube channel, I premiered a DKU lore tour earlier this year on Mario vs. Donkey Kong and my personal view on how one can reconcile the lore of the game with what's come before and come after with Donkey Kong. Now, I also did a bit of a piss take walkthrough on how to beat the Switch remake, but beat it as Donkey Kong. It was a joke. I also just got done discussing E3 2004 with Cameron on the last episode, the Electronic Entertainment Expo that served as the homecoming event for the buyout era DKU, and also featured Mario vs. Donkey Kong at the show. It was present shortly before it arrived in stores just a couple of weeks later. So I say all of this because DK Vine has produced more in the way of Mario vs. Donkey Kong content in the last 4 months than we have in the entirety of the 20 years it has existed as a game. And 20 years is exactly how long it's been since the Game Boy Advance original arrived in stores. So what's one more episode? What's one more production in the name of Mario vs. Donkey Kong? And we all knew this was coming eventually. There was no getting around it. I am being joined by DK Vine's resident and sole Mario vs. Donkey Kong enthusiast, Gibbon. Welcome to the Spotlight episode for Mario vs. Donkey Kong. We're going to touch upon why you love this game and this series so much, Gibbon. A series that is maybe somewhat contentious for some of our listeners, for some of our staff, and yet one that has stuck around, has stood the test of time from its release in May 2004 to the present day. Longer than any DK Vine staffer who's not me or David Thomas Lynch. So we're going to crack this nut together, Gibbon. We're going to put our brains together and we're going to answer the why of Mario vs. Donkey Kong.
Surely there's someone other than me by this point who likes this series.
I'm sure there is.
There's gotta be, right?
Yeah, but they're just not on staff.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
So we're just not going to look.
We've come a long way.
We're not going to pick up those logs. We're not going to look under those rocks. We're just going to just let you be the expert, and you can just wear that crown to your heart's content.
Yeah. Oh man, we've come a long, long way. Considering I think my first mention on a Kongversation episode was you talking about this game and doing an aside to tell me to shut up to preempt any comments in the stream chat or something.
Yeah, because I knew they were coming. And now my own view on this game has evolved a little bit. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I'm a convert. Like I'm not gonna say oh, I absolutely adore Mario vs. Donkey Kong, because I don't. But I also don't loathe it. I also don't despise it and make it my mission to make other people despise it. I'm basically neutral while also understanding that it does have its fans and it does have its place. And so this episode isn't going to be you and me going at it, rock'em sock'em robot style. We're not going to be trading fisticuffs here. That's not what this episode's about. Good. This is a friendly.
I'm pretty sure I'd fold like a deck chair.
No, I am nimble, but I'm a lover, not a fighter. So, and I try to bring that energy to the conversation. The show is about celebrating, or at least it isn't these days. It's about celebrating rather than tearing down. And so, if I don't have anything good to say, I generally don't bring it up and make it a focus point on the conversation. Now, I mean, if there's something egregious that has to be talked about, I will talk about it. But, generally speaking, it's just like, if a game's complete trash, I probably wouldn't be enticed to do a spotlight episode about it. So, here we are. But we'll get
as we're getting into, there are differing opinions on what's complete trash or not.
Exactly. And of course, this is a game. This is a series that not every Donkey Kong fan will be endeared to. It depends why you got into Donkey Kong, when you got into Donkey Kong, and so I think I'm included in that category. But I'm also trying to be an evolved individual and see other points of view and listen to them and respect them and even if I can't personally agree with it, I can at the very least say, hey, you're just as correct as I am. We all have a place. So, that being said, in the grand spirit of community and togetherness, I would like to remind everyone that DK Vine's Stinky Ape Summer kicks off the weekend of June 9th. Now, this is traditionally when E3 would have been held, or at least initiated. This is the weekend it would have began, at least festivity-wise. So, E3 is dead, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. We are replacing it, the rituals, the traditions. I mean, we're carrying some of it over, of course, but we're folding it into our Stinky Ape Summer branding so we can have conversations that are live on our Twitch channel all week long. We can have special events, special features, special streams. I will be announcing everything we're doing for Stinky Ape Summer. And it's going to be more than a week, probably. It's going to be, throughout the month of June, given we don't know when Nintendo's Direct is really going to be yet. But we will be announcing the loose plans for it very, very soon, because it's coming up in just a couple of weeks. Woo!
God, yeah, that's coming up fast.
Yeah, it's already Memorial Day weekend here in the States, so it's not going to be too much longer now before Stinky Ape Summer begins. And we will have this year. I was asked last year, where are the Stinky Ape Summer t-shirts on our merchandise store?
I was going to ask where the Stinky Ape Summer clothespins to pin your nose are.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have the means to sell those yet, but we embrace the stink.
Something up.
No, we embrace the stink. Jeff excluded. Jeff can't smell things.
Jeff can still embrace it. He just can't smell it.
Jeff can't appreciate the fine nuances that emanate off of that stinky ape, but in spirit, yes, Jeff can be there with us. And we will have a Stinky Ape Summer shirt available for you at dkvine.com/merchandise. Not there yet, but it will be there when Stinky Ape Summer commences. So you can bookmark that now. I will have it ready for you. So the 2 people out there who said they wanted it, I listen. Before we get into it, though, of course, DK Vine, for almost 25 years now, it'll be 25 years this August that DK Vine launched. And I will, of course, have plans for our 25th anniversary as well. But DK Vine has I should just read what the Google AI said about DK Vine, because that's the future, right?
This.
What?
You must.
What's wrong with generative AI? It's
Hyle. I'm a software developer. I make video games for a living. I write code. Generative AI is a blight.
I was trying to bite my cheek when I was saying that. Of course, I know it's a blight. It brought down our website for the better part of 3 months. The bot scrapers just stealing from us. But this is what Google said about DK Vine when I typed it in late last night. DK Vine is a source for news, podcast, and original content about the Donkey Kong Country shared universe. It has been a leading source since 1999. DK Vine has a Twitch channel that streams games from Donkey Kong Universe, Rare, and Playtonic. It also has a YouTube channel and is active on Twitter and Instagram. DK Vine is also home to the Kongversation podcast. Now, hit or miss there. Obviously not as fine-tuned as if a human had written that description. We got off lightly compared to a lot of things that were just completely
that's
botched. True.
Yeah.
Our friend Josh Wallen, who on the day we're recording this is celebrating his birthday. Happy birthday, Josh. It called Josh a doctor, Dr. Wallen. So, we got closer than he did. But I bring this up because it described our website in an apt way. News, podcasts, and original content about the Donkey Kong Country shared universe. Now, once on the forum, I said, because someone was complaining that we didn't cover the arcade games, the original Donkey Kong trilogy.
You can just say it was me. You don't have to say someone in air quotes.
I honestly didn't remember if it was you.
I mean, I have in the past, so...
I said, you know what, we covered Donkey Kong Country onward, but I would love if there was a website that complemented our own called maybe DK Girder, and, covered the arcade games and all of their spiritual heirs. Lo and behold, you and a friend of the site, Milo, did just that. Would you like to describe DK Girder?
Sure. Over at dkgirder.com, Milo and I will occasionally trot out a podcast or an article that covers the arcade games as well as the games in the arcade lineage, such as Mario vs. Donkey Kong, as well as other just sort of, I guess I would call them spiritual predecessors to various DKU stuff. So, I got a nice article up there about the Pendragon games from Ultimate Play the Game when he was added to Sea of Thieves. So if you're interested in the, historical anthropology of where these characters have come from, we might have something over there for you. But yeah.
DKGirder.com. The bot scrapers didn't get you yet, have they?
Not that I'm aware of. Honestly, we get, no traffic, so...
Well, buckle up, because I just gave you the old Kongversation bump.
Hey!
Yeah. So, at the very least, you'll be visited by the people in our live stream right now, because we do live stream this for DK Vine's $5 and up patrons. And right now we are joined by Freezer, March Rose, we got Porygon Q in there. Hello to everyone in our live stream at the moment.
Hello. You can't see it, but I'm waving at you all.
Yes. March Rose concurs. Just thinking the other day we needed a shirt. Freezer wants the winter version of Stinky Ape Summer. Freezer being down under. And I had a name for the what you could call Stinky Ape Summer if it's winter for you. It's very stupid and I forgot it. I don't have it written down. So, maybe I can get on that, but I'm also crunched right now with, and not the Diddy Kong Racing character, because that would be a fabulous thing to be crunched. Freezer, here's the deal, Freezer. I'll make a deal with you. If you can find the name that I said as a joke for what Stinky Ape Summer is, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, I will also make that a shirt. Deal? Freezer's doing that now. I love our audience. They're so passionate.
Freezer is a treasure and a benefit to the community. Thank you so much for joining.
It's true. And you know what? Everyone in our live stream and everybody listening at home right now is a treasure. I will say that about our audience. It's a wonderful group of folk we've cultivated and we've brought together under the auspices of the shared love for Donkey Kong, the Donkey Kong universe, however you want to parse it out, however Google AI will define it for you tomorrow. So let's get into this though. Mario vs. Donkey Kong came out on the Game Boy Advance, first in the Americas, on May 24th, 2004, before arriving in Australia and New Zealand on June 4th, Japan on June 10th, and not in Europe until November 19th. Yeah, we were talking just on the last episode, Cameron and I, about the weird staggered releases across the international spectrum during this era. How it doesn't feel like it was that long ago to some of us, but it really was. And like the easiest way to see that is how we didn't have day one releases worldwide. You had this excruciating wait. And like the irony here is the irony for DK Vine as it existed in May 2004, the staff of that era, like between this and DK King of Swing, we are obviously going to be looking more toward DK King of Swing as like, oh yeah, that's the GBA Donkey Kong related game we really want. And the majority of us lived in the Americas, and DK King of Swing is the one that the Americas didn't get till last. And this is the one we got first. So, I mean,
well, that makes sense considering it was made down the street from me.
Yes, it does. So here's the thing about Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I like to tailor every Spotlight episode to the game itself. Yes, we have a formula for these, for 2D platformers, maybe 3D platformers, but you have to tweak it depending on what the game is. It's not a one-size-fits-all episode formula. And I'm not sure it would behoove us to follow the traditional Spotlight formula for this game. Because Dustin and I, we did discuss the fairly faithful Switch remake earlier this year. It had new features, it had new worlds, new levels added to the mix, but we're obviously going to be hitting some parallel or intersecting points on this episode. And that's okay if we do, because each episode needs to stand alone and by itself. And this is the Spotlight for Mario vs. Donkey Kong. So I don't want to say we're not going to be discussing this or that because Dustin and I covered that a couple months ago. That's not fair to the GBA original. That's not fair to its Spotlight episode. But I invited Dustin on that First Impressions episode because I always knew that when we eventually did a Spotlight for the original, it was going to be you, Gibbon, on that episode. I mean, it was never a doubt. Well, come on. There's never a doubt in my mind. And that's why, contrary to what most people probably would have thought, like longtime listeners, I did not have you on that episode because I thought it would be an interesting dichotomy to bring Dustin on, because Dustin, of course, was weirdly negative for Dustin for the remake. Because Dustin's a fairly chipper fella. Like
Dustin's great, but yeah, he did not like that game.
Yeah, Dustin's basically a cartoon character made real, and he brings that energy and enthusiasm to everything he does for DK Vine or for the podcast that's just wrapping up, I should say, that he does with our friend Mitchell Wolf, telling the tale about Telltale Games. They've just recorded the final episode for that, so cheers to them.
The final for now.
Well, yes, they have to, because the structure of that podcast does not really lend itself to be the perpetual motion machine that DK Vine's The Kongversation is. But, Dustin, it's weird for Dustin to be negative on anything. And I thought, this is weird because historically I have been the poo-pooer when it comes to Mario vs. Donkey Kong. And I kind of enjoyed the remake for what it was. And so I was like, this is weird, me being the defender. And I didn't want you on there because I thought it would be more fascinating to kind of switch up the roles. And I also knew that later in the year, we would be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong. And of course, you would be on that one. So, my feelings on the Game Boy Advance game have historically been a bit more compromised than the Switch remake. While you, Gibbon, you obviously love it.
Oh, yeah.
So what I would like to do for this episode is kind of take a step back, because usually I yammer on and on and on and on and on. And I would kind of like to cede the floor to you just a little bit. I'm obviously going to chip in and give my 2 cents, but I would really like to use this opportunity to get into the why. And this isn't me putting you on the spot. I'm fascinated. My passion, of course, is for the Donkey Kong universe, specifically Rare and what they brought to Donkey Kong and the titles that are related to that, like Banjo-Kazooie, Conker, a shared area of interest in the Venn diagram that Gibbon and I have. But I'm also just in general fascinated by the nature of fandom. I find it so intoxicating to put myself in somebody else's shoes and to really understand why they like something, why they have so much passion for something that I might not, or that I might, okay, Star Wars. Like, I just like Star Wars, right? Like, like anything that's been going on for decades, it's had its ups and downs. We can all agree or disagree about where those might lie, but I'm not like huge into Star Wars. I just can't do it. I just can't read all the books. I can't read all the comics. I can't play all the video games. It's getting hard to keep up with all the TV shows, and so I just, I like Star Wars, but I'm fascinated by the people who just love Star Wars or Star Trek or Doctor Who, or I really just love trying to understand other fans of things. The same passion I have for the DKU. And I don't know what it is about it. Even things that maybe fall outside of the realm of geek genres, just what would it be like to be a fan of that? And
I think it boils down to it's just enjoyable to listen to people go on about something they're passionate about.
Yeah, but I like to pretend not pretend, but I like to just imagine, however briefly, what if I was really into that? How would I go about it? Would I bring the same sort of manic energy that I bring to DK Vine and the DKU? So anyway, this is a little bit different because this is an area of my fandom that I don't really feel that much passion for. And you do. And so I really want to get into not only why you love it, but also why this game exists. Why it exists in the form that it does, which is, I think, important in the discussion of it. Because, we even got this discourse out in the open a little bit in our community and elsewhere when the remake was announced last year. Because one of the things I kept hearing, even from the aforementioned Josh Wallen, is that why are you doing Mario versus Donkey Kong as a Switch remake when the game that's commonly referred to as Donkey Kong 94, a game that will also be celebrating its 20th anniversary next month, is held up as the modern classic, the like purest evolution of the arcade series. And Mario vs. Donkey...
It's a legitimate question.
And Mario vs. Donkey Kong, I don't want to say it's dismissed, because obviously the series has done well for itself. It's a series that's been ongoing since 2004. But I think there is this critical consensus that Donkey Kong 94 is the stone cold classic reimagining of the arcade series. And Mario vs. Donkey Kong might be... I don't want to be too dismissive. Like, lightweight is not really a fair term, but it does something different. It does something different with the formula, and it's not to everyone's taste or liking. And why did they do that? So, you are here with me, Gibbon, and I'm going to use this opportunity to really pick your brain. I want to know why Mario versus Donkey Kong. Just why Mario versus Donkey Kong. That is a question, it is a statement, and it is the thesis for this episode.
Okay. Well, before we get into the why of specifically Mario versus Donkey Kong, we need to go back a little bit.
How far back do you want to go?
Yeah, like, that's a good question, because we could go all the way back to, like, the 1930s or the late 1920s and get into, like, the origins of Popeye.
I would love
King
to.
Kong and the Perils of Pauline.
I just learned that the Popeye strip did not originate with Popeye. Like, we had like
he was a guest character in another ensemble strip.
Yeah, and it was like Olive Oyl and her brother, her like scheming brother, who's like
something like that. I want to say like Betty Boop has her origins in the same ensemble strip, actually.
Really, that's weird. But yeah, it was like Olive Oyl had a different boyfriend, and Popeye was this sailor who like they hired to ferry them across. To this, like, where the strip would be set for a few weeks.
It's always fascinating seeing which characters take off in old strips like that. I could go on a whole podcast episode about that.
But see, this is what I'm talking about. Like, I'm fascinated by fandom, and I just went this wiki wormhole. I just binged on, like, Popeye.
It is kind of fascinating that all of the things that like converged to be Donkey Kong in 1981 had their origin in like this 5-year window back in like 1929 to 1934.
Yeah.
Because you got Popeye, you got King Kong growing out of the sort of cinematic trend at the time of big apes and damsels in distress. The 2 or 3 films prior to King Kong coming out were extremely racist and in bad taste, and the less said about them the better. But King Kong was like, people bought tickets for those because they liked the concept, but they stormed out in the middle of them and wrote like City Hall because of the content. So King Kong was an attempt to make a more broadly appealing version of that. But also we made the gorilla like skyscraper sized for some reason and spawned the entire kaiju genre.
Yeah.
But then The Perils of Pauline was a cinema serial, like one of those things like Flash Gordon that you'd get like a little like Looney Tunes sized episode of before your movie proper aired. About this wealthy heiress named Pauline and whatever wacky trouble she was in this episode. And like our modern Pauline, she would, do a little bit of everything as the serial needed. So sometimes she was like on a safari in Africa with a rich uncle. Sometimes she was being a singer. Sometimes she was working at a circus, or yada, yada, yada. So you had all these sort of cultural things of the day. But then you fast forward to 1980, 1981, and Nintendo is making a Popeye game and suddenly can't get the license to Popeye. So, like, entire rivers of articles have been written on the design of Mario and how he came about to be that original Jumpman sprite of like, oh, we did a hat because we didn't want to animate hair, and we went with this way because of this, and the yada yada yada. And obviously he's replacing Popeye, but they still needed replacements for Bluto and Olive Oil. So they named the damsel Pauline, or actually they named the damsel Lady. She didn't have a name yet, and she went through a couple names before she got to Pauline. She was Louise for a hot minute.
I can't hear Lady, though, without hearing Jerry Lewis in my head.
Hey, lady!
I hate it.
It was Jumpman and the Lady. But yeah, so she was eventually named Pauline, presumably in honor of the perils of Pauline, and that sort of like being kidnapped by a giant ape thing, which did happen to Pauline in one serial.
Mm-hmm.
And they went with a gorilla for Donkey Kong, just for the vibe, I guess. King Kong was still fairly prominent. The first remake series was, people didn't know it was over yet. We'll put it that way. They'd had like the first remake. It was still getting video games. Konami was putting out King Kong games and stuff at the time. And yeah, so like King Kong was back in popular culture, and Popeye was obviously still around and kicking, to the point that Nintendo had to negotiate the license and failed to secure it. And then, I don't know, I guess someone had watched The Perils of Pauline at some point. And they all converged and created this masterpiece that is Donkey Kong. And one of my earliest memories is of like age 4 playing Donkey Kong on my parents' Atari 2600.
Wow. I'm a latecomer to Donkey Kong in that regard, where I didn't even learn about Donkey Kong until Donkey Kong Classics. When I've talked about this, I went into KB Toys with my mom in the mall, and I saw this video game cartridge behind the desk, like the box for the NES, and it was Mario, and this giant gorilla, and the gorilla's baby, toddler, son, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is Donkey Kong? But Mario's in it, and I knew Mario, of course, so I was like, I loved apes, I loved monkeys, I loved simians. Like that was my like favorite type of animal, and so I was intrigued.
Oh, same.
I was intrigued, and the game was cheap enough, so my mom got it, and that was how I was introduced to Donkey Kong. Not knowing any of the history, that this was Mario's first appearance, that this was like Miyamoto's breakthrough game. Like, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about the arcade game at the time. That was when I first like got into the notion of Donkey Kong, and I really liked Donkey Kong Jr. That was my favorite of the two that were in that package. And then from there, of course, Donkey Kong Jr. appeared in Super Mario Kart, and I was like, oh my god, I know this guy. And then it was a short while after that Donkey Kong Country came around and completely upended my life.
Yeah, my history with video games is a bit weird. My parents were giant nerds. And so like, yeah, they had an Atari 2600, and my dad taught me how to program in Commodore Basic when I was 7, which is when I wrote my first video game with his assistance. And I grew up reading their long boxes of comic books and watching their old like Star Wars and Star Trek VHSs and whatnot. But I didn't have a Super Nintendo until after the N64 was out. And so like my video games were very primitive growing up. But Donkey Kong was one of the first ones I have any memory of playing. And from there, like, I don't know how I even got access to it, but like my first Mario branded game was Mario Bros. Special on a PC that somebody had in their basement.
Wow.
Yeah. So like I had a weird journey to sort of eventually converge with the rest of normal people.
It's no wonder you like all of these esoteric
Yeah,
ports.
right. And also, yeah, I liked apes and primates and stuff a lot because my mother is a primate researcher and in fact used to work at the primate center that Zaboomafoo was filmed at.
Mm.
So, yeah. And just like, so I just sort of was around that growing up. And my mother also likes Donkey Kong. Like when we did eventually get Donkey Kong Country, I had to like, I was only allowed to use 2 of the save slots because the last one was for her, it's for her file.
I don't think I ever got your origin story, so this like adds up. Like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And I'm jealous that you had easy access to primates, and I've never. My goal in life, the one thing on my bucket list, is to be hugged by a gorilla.
Oh, I haven't done that. I have played with some lemurs, one of which might have been Zaboomafoo's parent.
Mm.
But yeah. No larger apes.
On my honeymoon, I had a bunch of monkeys crawl all over me. That sounds weird. I should clarify. We went to a monkey preserve.
That's amazing.
I know it was great, but that's as close as I've gotten to touching ape and monkey kind.
But yeah, so let's jump forward in our timeline a little bit.
Okay.
Getting back on topic. So we were at 1981 and Donkey Kong happened. And then in 1994, they decided to reboot the series and redo the character designs, update them for more modern era. They gave Donkey Kong this snazzy tie. As I'm still not sure why they gave him that tie. It's emblematic of like, I don't know. It's sort of like you've got the working class Mario versus the guy, the dumb ape in a tie. There's something sort of iconic about that blue collar versus white collar imagery.
I also think it was just like it's pretty clear as a Miyamoto decision, right? Like it was yeah. And I think it was just we need to give Donkey Kong something identifying rather than just having him be a gorilla. It makes sense.
And the red tie makes sense. It's very Disney, like Mickey's got the red shorts or Donald's got like his little hat, like sailor top or whatever. Like the one article of clothing for your animal character is a very sort of like Disney Looney Tunes approach to thing. But yeah, they redesigned him. They gave him the tie. They gave him the unruly shock of hair. And they put out this beloved game. And also they did some things with some Brits that released on the Super Nintendo.
Oh, okay. I see how it is.
Okay. But yeah, this game was sort of I guess it was sort of like what Donkey Kong Land was after Donkey Kong Country came out. Donkey Kong, just named Donkey Kong for the Game Boy, sometimes referred to as DK94, was that before Donkey Kong Country came out. It was the handheld accompaniment sort of meant to refresh people on Donkey Kong, reintroduce him to the gaming public.
Yeah, because
he'd kind of been gone for a hot minute.
Well, and that's what I was trying to get at earlier is as someone who came aboard Nintendo in the late 80s, I did not know who Donkey Kong was. I did not know that was a thing. And so if you were young enough or you were like divorced enough from the culture of the history of video games, like unless you had somebody in your family to tell you, hey, this is actually what came before Super Mario Brothers and Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, you just didn't know who he was. Like maybe I saw him on Captain N, but I didn't know. I didn't put together the pieces, right? And so I always took Donkey Kong 94. Well, I mean, Donkey Kong GB, however you want to define it. It's just called Donkey Kong. But I always took that game to be Nintendo's way to kind of prime the audience for what Donkey Kong Country is. Because just like I argue Conker's Bad Fur Day does not have any relevance unless you have Conker's Pocket Tales coming first, Donkey Kong Country might not have the weight behind it if people don't understand the history behind the character and where he's been before.
Yeah, and it's very clearly meant to be a primer because in Cranky's little rants he goes on, if you sit and listen to him in Donkey Kong Country, when he's talking about the good old days and talking about the graphics and stuff, he mentions specifically like 3 Shades of Black or something like that, which doesn't make sense if he's referring to the arcade game. He's referring to the Game Boy game that had come out earlier that year.
Yeah, the good old days, last May.
Yeah. Yeah. These characters aged quickly. It's a hard and fast
there's a jump forward in time, but yes, I mean, it's...
Yeah.
Donkey Kong 94 does not literally take place in 1994, or it's not supposed to.
Yeah, and it was a fairly expansive game. Like, yes, it comprises a remake of the original Donkey Kong, but that's just the first 4 levels of, like, 101. And, like, it was actually pretty, like, important, all things considered. Like, yes, it was a reintroduction of Donkey Kong to the public, but also, like, it was the first time Mario was doing, like, double and triple jumps and swinging around on, like, clotheslines and picking up and throwing enemies and doing just basically everything he's known for doing in Super Mario 64 he did here first.
Mm-hmm. It's important to point out that Nintendo EAD was behind this game, which there's a lot of confusion about like who is responsible for what. You just see Nintendo and you're just like, Nintendo did it, but this game and Mario vs. Donkey Kong, technically different studios behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And
this
was also, it's probably not as historically important as Mario being an acrobat, but at the time it was a big deal. It was the first Super Game Boy enhanced Game Boy title.
Was more or less the launch title for it.
It was
prominently featured in the Super Game Boy commercial and everything.
And it's one of the Super Game Boy enhanced Game Boy cartridges that actually makes use of the peripheral, which for those who weren't around or have never heard of it, the Super Game Boy was basically a Super Nintendo cartridge that you would put your Game Boy cartridges in and put it in your Super Nintendo, and you could play Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo, which was a huge, huge deal. Like, I love a certain subset of Nintendo peripherals and devices that kind of get lost in history as technology marches forward and games are just emulated on things like Nintendo Switch Online. The Super Game Boy was how I really was able to enjoy to the fullest my Game Boy library, because back then, the Game Boy, this was before the Game Boy Pocket, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy was just this brick handheld with the worst screen imaginable.
Right. Like, for all you youngsters, we're not exaggerating when we call it a brick. It was about brick size.
It's about brick size. The screen was pea soup colored, like, and you had to like be sitting under the perfect lighting conditions to be able to see anything. And
it was basically a TI calculator LCD screen.
It was, yeah. And the Game Boy Pocket came out, was that 96?
Something like that.
Maybe. And the Game Boy Pocket really like upped it because it had a very crystal clear screen that you could really appreciate how the games looked for the first time in handheld form. But before that, the Super Game Boy really did step it up, and you could just play it on your Super Nintendo. And while it removed the handheld aspect of it, for people like me who just love savoring games and like just transporting myself into the world and studying every detail, it was this huge step up as far as like I could actually just soak in a Game Boy game for the first time.
Nintendo's first foray into doing the hybrid handheld console.
Yeah, and of course they would later have the
gameplay.
The Game Boy Player for the GameCube.
Hmm.
Um,
They actually had I think it was called the Wide Boy, which was an N64 accessory that lets you play Game Boy Color games as well.
mm,
But that one was not widely distributed much at all. So
yeah, but yeah, loved my Super Game Boy.
yeah, um, and just like it was a big deal. To the point where like when they announced in 2002 at E3, which is in the better part of a decade later, that they were doing Donkey Kong Plus for the Game Boy Advance,
Hmm.
a remake going from like 8 bits to 32 bits and full color, doing like, nice extensive backgrounds and whatnot. Um, Nobody was surprised. Everyone was like, yes, this is long overdue. Excellent. Because they hadn't done like a GBC update of the game. So getting it on Game Boy Advance was like even better. It was going to be called Donkey Kong Plus. The demo they showed was very short, just showed like a level or two. And it was basically just DK94, but with 32-bit sprites in full color. Exact same mechanics as that. Um, and they also advertised that it was going to have some GBA GameCube link cable functionality with some sort of editor. Whether this was just going to like magically work on the GameCube by connecting to the GBA, or if you needed like a separate software disk or not, a little unclear. But it was going to be a level editor where you could make custom levels on the GameCube and import them via the link cable
Hmm.
into your GBA file. Since stuff for the editor exists on the cartridge of what eventually came out, but it was just dummied out, I suspect um, it was going to be a like just plug it into your GameCube, and I don't know, maybe you needed a GBA player or something to do it. But yeah, unclear little how on how that would work.
Yeah,
But yeah,
and
people were excited about this.
Donkey Kong Plus. I should also just clarify for those who aren't familiar. Use the same style of Donkey Kong
Yes,
that
yes.
Donkey Kong 94 debuted, because another thing I feel like I'm mansplaining Donkey Kong to our audience, but a lot of this stuff, as I've learned, has fallen by the wayside down the memory hole, because the stuff I take for granted nowadays, like, oh yeah, of course, like, you were around back then, right? And then, like, just the last episode, we had somebody call in who was a newborn during E3 2004. So
Right?
it was
Everyone's just this side of 40. That makes sense, right?
yeah. So I'm like, you know what? I should educate, even if everybody, like, I shouldn't presume everybody knows like the history. So, Donkey Kong 94 reintroduced Donkey Kong to the then current Nintendo audience and kind of set the stage for Donkey Kong Country, which was the um, more like grand updating of Donkey Kong and his world and his mythology. That would be kind of locked in stone going forward, but that doesn't mean that the new design for Donkey Kong or Donkey Kong Jr. or Pauline, I guess, that Donkey Kong 94 pioneered would fall by the wayside, because
Yeah, no.
from 1994 to 2002, there were sort of two parallel Donkey Kong, if not series, then identities. Because while Rare had domain of Donkey Kong Country and all of the characters created for that, Nintendo was still using the Donkey Kong 94 Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. in several games, like Mario's Tennis for the Virtual Boy, like the Game & Watch Gallery series for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. And so
For a more modern comparison, it's very similar to what Sega's doing right now with modern and classic Sonic.
yeah, there you go. Happy birthday, Josh. So it was the buyout just a couple months after E3 2002
Yeah.
that started to change how Donkey Kong was going to be portrayed, because some of this we don't have confirmed, but Nintendo very much has an ethos that they respect the studio kind of in charge of certain characters, I guess, and they very much viewed Rare as Donkey Kong and his extended cast home studio, with the exception of those elements from Donkey Kong 94 that was developed outside of Rare's auspices and more were the spiritual continuation of the arcade era.
Yeah, it was also sort of around the GameCube GBA era that Nintendo started doing this. I don't know. I've used the term homogenization in the past.
That's fair.
They started to do this homogenization of character designs. So, like, for another example, outside of Donkey Kong, they had two young Bowser characters running around. They had Bowser Jr., first introduced in Super Mario Sunshine.
Yes.
And they had Baby Bowser, originally introduced in Yoshi's Island back on the Super Nintendo. And those characters originally look very, very different. But it was around this era with the introduction of Bowser Jr. in Sunshine that you started getting Baby Bowser showing up in the Yoshi games as basically the same character design as Bowser Jr., just maybe with some different clothing on or something.
I also want to interject and say that the Mario Party series had the Baby Bowsers.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then they eventually became the Koopa Kids or something of the sort. I think started with Mario Party 4. And eventually they were phased out for Bowser Jr. as well.
They just started doing that, and it wasn't just with characters. It was around this period that they started like, well, we've got 3 different like racing series. Do we really need that? We can have just one sort of thing. So they started on this sort of like grand homogenization or consolidation of design and like design ethos. So I imagine a bit of that went into the decision to just start using the one design for Donkey Kong in games moving forward. And I imagine Rare leaving for Microsoft also played a part in them sitting down and re-examining how they wanted to present the series moving forward as well.
It definitely accelerated things because like we have a little bit of evidence for this. The game that bridged it, the game that sort of was the passing of the torch of consolidating the Donkey Kong 94 sub-series or sub-presentation of Donkey Kong like into the just Rare design was Game & Watch Gallery 4, which came out very soon after the buyout, like later in 2002. And like it used the Donkey Kong 94 look for Donkey Kong and had Donkey Kong Jr. in it, except the title screen. They did put the Donkey Kong Country style Donkey Kong on the title screen, which is why we have it on our games page at DK Vine. But the other piece of evidence is that we know in Mario Kart Double Dash, the original plan was to pair Donkey Kong and the Donkey Kong Country Donkey Kong, which Nintendo felt free to use in things like Mario Kart 64, Mario Party, and so on.
Mario Tennis.
Yes.
Yada yada.
Not to be confused with Mario's Tennis, which was before they started doing this. Because Donkey Kong, Super Donkey Kong, as Miyamoto called him at the time, that was kind of a later decision in Mario Kart 64. Because, of course, originally Kamek was going to be in the game. Kamek replacing Koopa Troopa, Wario replacing Donkey Kong Jr., and then they came upon the idea of, Donkey Kong Country is really popular. Screw it. We're calling our shot now and putting that Donkey Kong in Mario Kart 64. I mean, it worked for me. Like I got an N64 because of that damn decision, but I would have waited until like Diddy Kong Racing, so it's fine. But like that sort of like broke the ice a little bit there. But the game that like really like consolidated it fully was Game & Watch Gallery 4, and we know that Mario Kart Double Dash was going to incorporate Donkey Kong Jr. as the modern Donkey Kong, as I call him, Super Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Country Donkey Kong, Rare Donkey Kong, however you want to define him. He was going to be partnered with Donkey Kong Jr., which of course, you know, Baby Mario, Baby Luigi are in that game, you know, like whatever. But obviously people would start just thinking, well, that's just Donkey Kong's son, the Donkey Kong from Donkey Kong Country, and all sorts of questions would be raised. But after the Rare buyout, they were like, well, why don't we just use Diddy Kong? I mean, we don't have to have this some sort of like weird social business niceties that we like, oh, well, that's Rare's character, Diddy Kong. We shouldn't use him in this Mario game. Well, now Rare is owned by the competition, so why don't we use Diddy Kong? You can still see Donkey Kong Jr. in the files for that game, and he still appears in Waluigi Stadium in the crowd.
Yeah, in the crowd.
Yeah, he makes up like these Kongs just sitting in the crowd. But yeah, like had it not been for the Rare buyout, it would have been probably Donkey Kong Jr. in Double Dash. So both this kind of consolidation of character design and sort of how they're presenting the characters. And I've talked about this before. I do kind of miss how wildly divergent Mario could look during this era.
Yeah,
like during the 90s, 80s and 90s, like Mario could look different with each game. And I kind of miss that. I
super miss it.
The chubbier Mario.
We're getting a little bit of that back now. Like Mario Wonder changed up the art style for the first time in fucking decades.
Yeah. I did like how Mario looked in Wonder, but you also eventually got a homogenization of the way the Kong cast looked, starting with DK King of Swing.
Yeah.
That kind of introduced their modern appearances, broadly speaking, in that game. But yeah, they just looked at this and they're like, you know, it's too confusing to have two parallel Donkey Kong presentations. Let's just go with the Rare looks, the Donkey Kong Country looks, and the cast for that matter. And we'll just sort of quietly retire Donkey Kong Jr., except for explicit throwbacks. Like, they will use the notion of Donkey Kong Jr., but only in a kind of nostalgic sense. Like the kind of 16-bit sprite version in Mario Kart Tour, or spirits in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but they never just go all in and say, here's Donkey Kong Jr. existing in the present day. No, I mean, no, just say the modern Donkey Kong is Donkey Kong Jr. We can all just...
well, I mean, they did say that. They said that multiple times!
Oh, be nice.
But yeah, in the midst of all this, what we were originally getting at is they changed from just basically colorized versions of the DK94 sprites to going full, like, ACM style pre-rendered graphics for this GBA game with the Donkey Kong Country design for Donkey Kong.
Yes.
And DK64 sound bites for him, I believe.
Yeah, this was that weird period of what we call the buyout era, where it's post Rare getting purchased by Microsoft, but before everything kind of settled, where they like completely like settled on the new designs for a lot of the Kong cast.
Yeah.
I say new designs, they're basically the same, but they tweaked some things. They didn't recast the parts yet. And so you would have things like Grant Kirkhope's audio clips or Chris Sutherland's audio clips, speaking of Diddy, and they would be reused from Donkey Kong 64, and you would still have like Donkey Kong 64 designs showing up and things like Mario Power Tennis for like the critters, and like Donkey Konga 2, like Dixie still had her knee pads, and it was just this, it took a while for things to kind of settle into.
It's kind of amazing how them going, oh, we've got a crocodile character in Diddy Kong Racing, let's just make him a Kremling, sort of accidentally defined what Kremlings were going to look like for the next 20 years.
Yeah. But yeah, they changed the look of Donkey Kong Plus when it became Mario versus Donkey Kong.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the title,
yes.
I have a theory about that, because I've run into people before who were like, why is it called Donkey Kong? You're not playing as Donkey Kong. And it's like, well, that's just how games were titled back then. Like, the game's not called Samus, it's called Metroid. You know? Like, you name it after the big bad guy of the piece. Like, it's like that way in movies too. King Kong, Godzilla, etc., etc.
This was about, what, a year after Freddy versus Jason? Was it just trying to ride the zeitgeist?
Yeah, and so... kind of like I imagine they did Mario versus Donkey Kong to, one, tell people that this was not going to be playing as Donkey Kong. You were going to be playing as Mario versus Donkey Kong. But also, yeah, it's just a catchy title in the vein of Freddy versus Jason, Alien versus Predator, etc. So yeah, just maybe a bit of riding that zeitgeist. It says what it is what it says on the tin, sort of thing. So we get a rebranding of the game from Donkey Kong Plus to Mario vs. Donkey Kong. We get a rebranding of the aesthetics from the classic Donkey Kong look to the modern Donkey Kong look, to borrow some Sonic parlance. And they also, like, Pauline's not in the final product.
She's not.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
Because she was a big part of the original. Like, that's where her redesign debuted, that they still use today. Was used in Mario Odyssey. First debuted in DK94. And she's in the next Mario vs. Donkey Kong game, and was in every Mario vs. Donkey Kong game after that.
Yeah.
But she's not in this one. Instead, they have these mini Marios. And
yes.
They basically took over the series.
Yeah.
Like, this is a part that people find really contentious.
Yeah, well, before we get into that, I would like to circle back to the art style of the game really quick.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the game uses the pre-rendered art style, and I don't know if they were consciously trying to mimic the Donkey Kong Country games with this.
I think they were, because there's other, like, sort of side references to Donkey Kong Country. Like, you have more DKC-ish jungle areas that weren't in DK94. You have some like music remixes, as well as like the Ram Rhino enemies that I know you kind of gave some shit to.
I mean, they're called Rams, but they don't really evoke Rambi to me, personally speaking. As somebody who knows Rambi, loves him.
I know.
Yeah.
Speaking personally, my first thought upon playing the game for the first time was like, oh, they must be like baby Rambis or something.
Oh, okay.
So,
but like, I know people don't.
But I also view. It has been noted in many other podcasts that I view the series, the franchise, way differently than everybody else does. Because I don't make those delineations of like side series and whatnot in my head. It's all just Donkey Kong to me.
Yeah.
So I see rhinos named Ram. Obviously, they're related to Rambi somehow. That's just the connection my brain made. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the art style is kind of contentious as well, and. Like, I will say I like the way the Switch remake looks a lot more than this, but I'm also intrigued by the art direction of the original game, because it uses that pre-rendered style. I call these games, because, Rare, the moniker they gave their pre-rendered games were ACM, Advanced Computer Modeling, or whatever, just a bullshit term they came up with, but it's catchy, it sounds good in magazine write-ups. So there's a certain, like, class of game outside of Rare that will either feature Donkey Kong or his cast, or maybe evokes him here or there, that I like to call almost computer modeling because it kind of lightly mimics that. But
Yeah.
it's not quite there. You get this game, you get Super Mario RPG, the original for the Super Nintendo. You get DK Jungle Climber, the sequel to King of Swing that abandoned the kind of hand-drawn art style and just went all in on kind of making it look like Rare's games, but again, not quite. And this game does that, but in this kind of very Mario setting. That has elements of the arcade games in there and Donkey Kong 94. I don't I don't know that I like it, but I find it fascinating. And this is the only game in the series to use this art style. After this, they kind of scaled it back and went in a more traditional direction.
Sort of like... Yeah, they kind of go all over the place with this series. Like, it's the same design. They don't change the designs at all.
Yeah.
But they sort of like go back and forth on whether it's going to be pre-rendered or just like detailed sprite work,
right,
or what exactly they want to do with it.
I find it interesting though that the box art for it uses kind of that hand-drawn style a little bit, like kind of cel-shaded a little bit, but it's it's weird. Like, I don't know, because I like the box art for what it is. Like, I don't like Toothy Grin Donkey Kong all that much, but he was in vogue in that era, so whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I almost wonder if they did the box art like after the decision to change the design, obviously, since it's like the DKC Donkey Kong on the box art, but before the decision to go with the pre-rendered graphics happened.
Yeah.
If those were indeed separate things.
Yeah, I don't know. Like all of the game art, like all of the individual like character artwork for the game also uses this style. So I don't know. It's just interesting kind of split there because every other pre-rendered game uses that for the box art for the game's like promotional art style, and this game kind of hides it a little bit. I don't know. Just weird, but
yeah. Just another, I imagine that's just another carryover of the sort of like change in identity this game went through.
Yeah, it went through quite a lot in 2 years.
But yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, like, so we were talking about the minis. Let's see. They're in the game. I don't want to delve into them like quite yet. Because now that we've rewound a little bit, maybe we should build up to the minis.
Well, yeah, and that's fine because they whine too, so it works.
Yeah. So like, yeah, in this change of identity, we had some side references to DKC stuff. We had the DK64 sound bites and the like sort of jingle remixes, and then like, and that's what was. The game, as it was going to come out, was presented to the public again in E3 2004, 2 years after we'd last seen it as Donkey Kong Plus.
Wait, it wasn't at E3 2003? I thought that's when we learned it was Mario versus Donkey Kong, or was that later?
That's a good question. We may have learned it was going to be Mario versus Donkey Kong, but I'm not sure we'd seen it again.
I remember, because E3 2004 was like 2 weeks before it came out. In the West.
True.
And I remember learning that it was going to have the Donkey Kong Country style Donkey Kong like quite some time before, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, well this is DKU and DK Vine's terminology. So we're gonna have to reconcile why Donkey Kong is now fighting Mario. And in my head, it was gonna be some sort of like grand fallout they would have, because obviously they'd gotten chummy a little bit since Mario Kart 64. Like, some games, like in the Mario Party series, were showing them just as outright friends at that point. So it was like, oh, there's going to be some sort of like massive falling out between them. Is like Donkey Kong like gonna come home and discover like Cranky Kong's had a heart attack because Mario like sent him a threatening letter or something. Of course I was really
this was the era of them marketing Nintendo with like gang tattoo, or marketing Mario with gang tattoos.
Yeah, so and of course in my brain, in my perspective as the Donkey Kong fanatic, Mario's always at fault. So, like, oh,
to be fair, this game notwithstanding, Mario's the one at fault in basically the rest of the series.
And we'll get into that. I promise we will get into that, because my issues with this game don't necessarily apply to a lot of its sequels. Even though I find this game more fascinating from a gameplay perspective than I do the sequels.
You know what? I generally agree with that.
Yeah, so that being said, like, when they announced the change, of course, I was like trying to rationalize it in my head, but it wasn't sitting right with me. And I read this description that I wrote for DK Vine's E3 2004 preview, the very first news article.
2000s DK Vine.
The very first news article published on DK Vine, because as I said on the last episode, up until that point, we had done everything via like an updates tab. So this was the very first article on DK Vine. Still is the first article you can browse on our website today. But I wrote for Mario vs. Donkey Kong for our E3 2004 preview. And forgive me, this is me from 20 years ago. A DKU game done in the style of the original arcade games. Donkey Kong Jr., after becoming good friends with Mario these recent years, has decided that he wants to be a crazy fuck on a whim and try to murder him by stealing his toys or something. Thank you, Nintendo. Only in your games can a hero become a total villainous asshole and then switch back again. I just bring that back up because it made people laugh. The last episode, I like repeating jokes, so so that was
they
where
were doing Wario pretty heavily. So yeah.
That was my headspace back in 2004, back 20 years ago, and so
that sounds like you 20 years ago.
It's still a little bit of me today, but this was also a very helter-skelter time for Donkey Kong. And I think the fans from the Rare era who maybe came aboard with Donkey Kong Country, maybe Diddy Kong Racing, maybe Donkey Kong 64, it was hard to find our bearings, hard to find our constant, because we were just adrift with not really knowing what the future of the franchise entailed, because we were getting this kind of arcade throwback revival, which of course had its roots before the buyout, before everything kind of got thrown up in the air, but still it was very much viewed as, okay, we have this arcade revival, we have this like rhythm game, we have a 2D platformer that's eschewing anything familiar except Donkey Kong that's also used with the bongo peripherals. We have the like Rare made Game Boy Advance remakes. We have this newcomer Payon doing this I don't even know, like, what, peg swinging game. So it was just like a lot to take in.
Yeah, and like, even the fans notwithstanding, I think Nintendo wasn't quite sure what the future of Donkey Kong was going to be.
Absolutely,
at this point in time.
It's something we've documented quite a bit here at DK Vine. But I also think what was really putting the thumb on the nerves of DK Vine for sure, but a lot of the other fans out there, was just the kind of critical blowback at the time to the Donkey Kong Country games, and this sudden like mainstream opinion that the Donkey Kong Country games were actually overrated trash, etc., etc. And so we were feeling very defensive. We were really feeling like, oh no, like everything's falling apart, and any one of these directions could be the future of Donkey Kong, and we're at war. We're at war with everything that we don't like. And of course, it seems silly and juvenile, and yes, it was, but like in the heat of the moment, without any historical like precedents behind us, it really was like, pick your side. And unfortunately, Mario versus Donkey Kong was very much viewed by me in this kind of negative prism, especially because the marketing was like, oh, the classic rivalry has been reignited. And I'm like, but Donkey Kong is a hero. But Donkey Kong is a good guy. Donkey Kong mentors Diddy Kong. What is happening? and it was just like, it's like watching your childhood sports idol, like,
drive around in a Ford Bronco.
Well, I wasn't going to bring up OJ because that's the low-hanging fruit right now, but yeah.
I mean, you do it every other episode. I figure I should, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally understand that. That makes sense. And of course, I can understand how you'd be in that headspace.
Of course, in the last 2 decades, things have simmered a little bit, and I can look at this game in a new light with all the recent developments and stuff as well. Like, this is, I joked, like, this is the year we've done more Mario vs. Donkey Kong content than any other year. And it's true, but it's also because we're in a far better headspace to do it rather than, it's probably a good thing we didn't really touch this game and its sequels and derivatives until I was emotionally ready to handle it. So anyway, you on the other hand, you were on board from day one.
Oh yeah, of course. I grew up playing the Atari version, and I had the NES classics, and I was playing the Game & Watch galleries and stuff. So this was just sort of like the next in that line of games of doing the classic Donkey Kong bit. Honestly, it never even occurred to me that this would be contentious until I went online and started seeing people talk about it.
Before you went to DK Vine?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, sorry. Let's talk about the plot, because you started to bring up the minis, and I really wanted to explain the minis first of all.
Yeah, this is nice. Because this is where to do it.
Because they're such. I was going to say a defining part of the series. They are the defining part of the series at this point, and it's just like, how did that happen? How did what was going to be the sequel to Donkey Kong 94 get us to this point where the series is about wind-up toys? It's such a weird leap, but the plot of the game introduces them, and they just never left that behind for the sequel. And I want to hear you describe the plot, because I have done it so much this year, and quite frankly, I'm tired of talking about it. So I want to hear you describe the plot of Mario vs. Donkey Kong.
So I believe the manual says something to the effect of in the wake of his recent fame and exploits and whatever, Mario has decided to open a toy company. Again, this made sense to me. Dating back to Donkey Kong Jr., Mario has been portrayed as someone who is deft with his hands and makes stuff. He made he made the snap jaws. They're animatronic bear traps with googly eyes. Mario made them.
Sort of like the. I've never had it confirmed if Rare was inspired by the Snapjaws to create claptraps. But
I know that I and many others when we were younger mistook them as little alligator things, so I would not be at all surprised. It was gorillas versus crocodiles, very common iconography. You saw it in Congo Bongo, Sega's sort of DK knockoff. You see it in lots of those old jungle adventure films that we were talking about earlier.
You see it in mythology. You see it in it just goes back.
You see it in King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
So just I imagine it contributed to just sort of the headspace being there when you think of, what would DK's enemies be? But yeah, so Mario makes things. He's no stranger to making little animatronics. This time he's making them in his own image like a god. and he's marketing them to the masses.
Narcissistic prick.
Yep, super is. But yeah, he has opened up a toy business. He's mass producing these Mario minis and employing the Toads of the Mushroom Kingdom to man the factories.
Like
and,
Oompa Loompas.
DK,
Yeah,
basically. Only slightly less racist.
Slightly.
DK sees an advertisement for them on television, falls instantly in love. He is down for owning this little wind-up mini Mario. He's fucking wants that shit. So he rushes to the toy factory and just barges in to take him.
And he does.
He does, yeah. And like, there's no getting around it. He is the bad guy in this game. He's the instigator of things. He went a little crazy. Was this still the era of people going crazy? Like, there was this show on in the late 90s, early 2000s. No. Like, there was this show. Do you remember this show in the late 90s where they would give someone like a shopping cart and let them loose in like a Toys R Us or whatever, and just tell them to go wild?
Okay.
Like,
so there was the shopping, like it was like some game show in the 80s where it was like Supermarket Sweep. I think that was what it was.
Yeah.
And then Nickelodeon in the 90s. This is pre Dan Snyder foot fetish Nickelodeon. They would have the like contest where you could go, like you would have 5 minutes or something in a Toys R Us or a KB Toys or something with a shopping cart. Whatever you fit in your cart, you got to keep.
But like, I feel like this was also, like, you were seeing portrayals in media of people just going absolutely apeshit while shopping. Like, I need that thing.
Well, like Black Friday.
Gun laws were getting... Yeah, Black Friday. People died on Black Friday.
I do feel like this is the era where Black Friday started to be popularized in the mainstream, because like up until a certain point, Black Friday was just what retail workers called the day after Thanksgiving because of all the sales. And they would have like day after in the US, I should say, the day after Thanksgiving sales. And then late stage capitalism eventually was like, hey, yeah, let's just call it Black Friday. And then Black Friday started to
because that's not an ominous name.
Yeah, right. And then Black Friday just started becoming like, oh, we're going to start it.
You heard of Black Tuesday.
Yeah.
Well,
now we're going to like start it like Wednesday, and it's going to go through into Friday, into Saturday.
Yeah.
And now we have like Black Friday and like Black Friday sales all year round because nothing has any meaning anymore.
And I feel like DK just going crazy, like literally crazy for these toys, is just sort of an extension of that basically, that sort of like media trope, real life, like people just going absolutely nuts for shopping. I need this thing, get out of my way, I will hurt you, sort of. That's what, like, he DK succumbed to some consumer rage.
Freezer in the live stream points out that in Australia they adopted Black Friday but have no Thanksgiving. You don't even get any like faux goodwill towards your fellow humans. It's just all shop. And Porygon Cube points out Cyber Monday. Yeah, like it's definitely just like, and then they like try to throw in like, oh, it's Giving Tuesday, and it's just like, yeah, nobody's paying attention anymore.
Like, I know you've joked about DK being like hypnotized by the swirls on the commercial or whatever.
I'm deadly serious about that.
Yeah, I know you are.
That's why in my DKU Lore Tour video, I put the disclaimer at the end that you did not approve of anything I said. I specifically exonerated you. Your hands are clean.
Well, clean of that, anyway.
Yeah.
But like, I do think there's a bit of truth to that, an extent. Like, the marketing got to him. It worked on him. It worked on him super well. So yeah, that's what's going on in this game. DK has taken over the factory, and like Willy Wonka, Mario's factory has a lot going on in it.
Yeah.
Each of these worlds is a like manufactured environment inside of his Willy Wonka toy factory.
Wait, is that supposed to be the reading on it, that all the worlds take place within the factory?
You know what? No, I'm wrong. In one of the later games, it is specifically all within the factory, but this one is not.
Yeah.
Specifically because of the holdover from it being a remake. So like, we know that like Twilight City is just Big City from DK94 at night, and like Mystic Forest is explicitly the same forest from DK94 and stuff like that. So DK took a bunch of the toys and took off, more or less. And yeah, there are, I think, like at least a couple of the worlds take place in the toy factory, though.
Well, yeah, the first world does. It's Mario Toy Factory, and then of course you loop back around once you beat the game. The Idaho crew didn't realize this when they were streaming. They thought
it was grand watching them, and I was like, "Congratulations, you're halfway through the game," and they were like, "Wait, what?" And it's like, "You unlocked Plus mode," and they were like, "Oh fuck this!"
Yeah, so. I thought they knew because
I thought they knew too.
Like,
I didn't realize they didn't know.
Yeah, when you beat the game, it just starts all over again, and you have to go through the plus worlds, which are just like.
To be fair, the plus worlds are way better than the normal worlds.
Yeah, I mean, like I think. Okay, so I didn't really like the game when I first played it. I do see the charms of it now that I played the Switch remake. I'm like, oh, okay, in a different headspace. I sort of understand the charms of the gameplay, at least. Even if I don't agree with the story or its presentation as a Donkey Kong game, or half a Donkey Kong game, I still think like the puzzles are kind of fun. It's kind of a breezy kind of thing. And in the era of like smartphone games where you just kind of mindlessly, let them take over like part of your brain, it's kind of nice to have to like sit down and try to solve something like how do I get Mario out of this stage while also collecting the presents and what have you.
But yeah, it all comes back to the minis. And
yes.
So yeah, let's pick that back up where I wound it up and set it down.
Okay, so the mini Marios.
Yeah, like, so right off the bat, minis are not a new concept to the world of Mario. We had minis. We had the mini Bowsers that followed the same naming conventions and the same little wind-up design ethos back in Super Mario World. We had wind-up Bob-ombs that showed up in earlier Mario games, and the Mario movie that had come out in '93. We've just had a lot of little wind-up animatronic toys throughout the Mario series. So this is really nothing new to the Mario sphere. It's just this is the first time that they're mini Marios and not some sort of enemy. So that's just like par for the course. But they, like I said, they kind of took over. They're the MacGuffin in this game. You are trying to rescue them as you go through the levels, but then in the normal set of worlds, each world will have a boss level, well, a pre-boss level. Like you have several normal stages where you're rescuing minis, and then you have the pre-boss level and the boss level. And in the pre-boss level, you're leading the minis through the stage like a game of Lemmings, except instead of having like a cursor to manipulate the world with, you're going through and doing it all manually in-game as Mario. Like you're platforming around and hitting the switches and like moving springs and stuff into place so that the minis can follow you up through the level and get to the goal exit. And that's once you've beaten the game once and you unlock the plus worlds, that's what you're doing in all of the plus worlds. You're leading minis through the areas and doing that. And I find that gameplay really fascinating. In subsequent games, it is just Lemmings. You just have a cursor. Usually you're using the stylus on the DS or 3DS to directly manipulate the world, and it's just leading the minis through. Mario only shows up in cutscenes. DK's still in boss levels for the most part, though even that gets phased out eventually. The minis are in the subtitles of every game moving forward, up to the point where they actually dropped the Mario versus Donkey Kong branding and just called the next game Mini Mario and Friends.
Yeah, Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge for the Wii U and 3DS, and that was the last new game in the series that we've gotten.
Yeah, like the series went through a bit of identity crisis because like the level editor intended for this game eventually got brought back into the series. Like that's something they were really pushing for. It did, and it became like the main selling point of the series, to the point where like you were collecting stars and like you were collecting MacGuffins in levels that unlocked more bits that you could use in the editor to make more interesting levels. You could share levels with people over like Nintendo's network and Miiverse and stuff. But all of that stuff sort of got like repurposed into the broader Super Mario Maker series, which NST, the development studio for these, also helped with.
Yes, Nintendo Software
Technology
Corporation is the full name.
Yeah,
NST.
and
Yes,
they were the original American Nintendo branch. They're down the street from me. NOA actually came later, although they share a compound with NST, and NST is now just one of the teams that works at NOA.
Yeah, and NST has been behind the series since it was Donkey Kong Plus.
Yes.
Yes.
And on the other side of things, the sort of like they tried a couple times to do gameplay that wasn't like editor focused. Like they had an entry on the 3DS called Mario and Donkey Kong.
Yes.
That removed the sort of like combative element of it. And it was doing more, it was a 3D approach to this series with directing the minis around sort of a 3D puzzle area. And but that kind of turned into the Captain Toad games, which again NST helped out with.
Yeah.
So Mario vs. Donkey Kong just kind of doesn't have a niche anymore because the two things it was doing went to other games.
Well, it's still got the Mini Marios, and eventually
it does have the Mini Marios, which is why you had Mini Mario and Friends as an amiibo vehicle.
Yeah, Mini Mario and Friends kind of took the minis and kind of... obviously, the minis have been the core focus of the game since the sequel, since the second one, and since a good chunk of this game, if we're honest. But like Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge introduced minis for all manner of both Mario and Donkey Kong characters. And, my biggest criticism of this series as a Donkey Kong Country kid, but just a Donkey Kong fan in general over Mario, is that I don't feel like it's just my picadillo, Gibbon. I know you might disagree with me on a lot of this, but I really wish Donkey Kong was more represented in these games. Like, I love that they brought Pauline back for the sequel. That was the right call. And I like how they have some arcade elements in there, like Snapjaws. Some elements from Donkey Kong 94 come back, like the Monchis. And, I like that. I want that stuff in there. The stuff that kind of serves as that bridge between where both Super Mario and Donkey Kong Country went as series after the arcade era. But the arcade era is where they kind of meet in the middle. But then they bring in things like Shy Guys and Bob-ombs and all, like, Toads, and I'm just like, it doesn't really just, it feels like Donkey Kong's in a Mario game. And
I mean, I can see where you're coming from. I can totally see where you're coming from there.
And like,
I disagree personally, but I can see where you're coming from.
But again, like I like the arcade stuff is in there. I wish they would have emphasized it more. But also, if you're going to bring in Mario stuff, then bring in some Donkey Kong stuff as well. And I'm actually speaking to Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge's favor here, because that is the first game, the most recent one, that actually started to broach that a little bit. They had a mini Diddy Kong, and both the Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong stages that you could take their mini figures through were, in fact, based on Donkey Kong Country games, like Donkey Kong Country Returns. Like, you even have Donkey Kong's treehouse from Returns in the background. You've got mine carts, you've got barrel cannons, and I'm just like, holy shit, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I wanted in this series, this opportunity to have the worlds of Mario and Donkey Kong collide. The worlds as we've known them to exist since the 80s and 90s, when they both kind of left the auspices of the arcade games behind and developed their own separate identities. Well, now they're coming back together. Let's have some fun with that. But no. And then they, like, for whatever reason, they just started focusing on the mini Marios. And, like, why did the mini Marios become the focal point of what was born out of a sequel to Donkey Kong 94? Like the torchbearer of the arcade series, the arcade era for Donkey Kong, suddenly became about wind-up Mario toys. And I just want to know the rationale.
Honestly, there's almost no way it was intended to take over the series the way it was. Like, I can almost guarantee it was intended to be a one-off MacGuffin. The next game in the series was a DSi title, very budget. That's probably one of the reasons they went with sprites instead of the pre-rendered stuff for that one. And it's short, it's kind of bare bones. Yeah, it reintroduces Pauline, but it's small. And like it was in the era of like show off what the DS can do full touchscreen integration stuff. So it kind of makes sense that they went with that like style of game, like the Lemmings sort of fuck with the stage as you go through it style. Mm-hmm. And that, like, I know for as much as the people on DK Vine sort of roll their eyes at the series, it sold incredibly fucking well. Mm-hmm. They made a lot of money on those budget titles.
Well, and I think that's the important thing to realize too, is the longevity of this series has been due to how cheap they are to make and the return they then get on them. They're not breaking the bank to make these. And that's not me speaking to quality. It's just when you have less of a budget and they can still turn in enough of a profit, well, then keep doing that. I mean, it's just simple economics. And, you know, I honestly, all video games should be cheaper to make. The ballooning budgets we've got these days, and the fact that one game can break a studio, it's just not sustainable. It's more.
Super not sustainable. And the industry is going through a bubble burst right now, which is why you have so many large mass studio layoffs and whatnot.
Well, that, and also talking about consolidation, like corporate buyouts that are unnecessary. And then,
talking about buyouts from Microsoft.
Yeah. So, but I'm saying, like, that's a plus in this series' favor. And you might be like, well,
but I'm explaining why things went the direction they did. It was like a one-off MacGuffin for this thing. When they went to the next title, they were like, okay, let's keep using that concept because it fits with what we have been mandated to do with the DS touchscreen integration. Like, how can we do this based on a concept we already have lying around instead of coming up with something completely new? And wow, look how much return on investment that brought in, sort of thing, and just went from there. So,
I mean, like, fair point. Like, it's something I remember, like, the controversy. I mean, manufactured kind of stupid controversy when the remake was announced last year, and people were just like, why are they doing this? Like, where's the real Donkey Kong game? And I'm like, well, they're doing it because it's cheap to do, because they see an opportunity with both the 20th anniversary and the zeitgeist of the Super Mario Brothers movie. And, so why wouldn't they? This has no bearing.
pretty much.
This has no bearing on the purported new Donkey Kong game that's in development, starring Donkey Kong and friends. Like, this is NST. It's a separate studio.
But again, the general public doesn't understand how games are made.
I get that. But and I could see the point of why don't they do Donkey Kong 94? But again, this is NST's baby. This is their breakthrough game. So why not do it? Because
also, by the time of the GBA, they were programming much differently than they were back on the Game Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And so just from personal experience, it's a lot easier to port and update a GBA game than it is to port and update a Game Boy game, because to port and update a Game Boy game, you're remaking it from scratch.
Right. And also that's
I've used the official what would I call them? I've used the official development kit for Game Boy games from Nintendo back in college, and it's writing stuff in assembly. You'd have to rewrite the game from scratch, whereas the development kit for the GBA, you're writing in much more modern and conventional programming languages that are still in use today. So it's basically just do the right hookups to make it run on the new system.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And also, to those who want Donkey Kong 94 remade, that's a separate studio. That was Nintendo EAD behind that. So
that's true.
It's not up to NST to remake Donkey Kong 94. And if they want to do remake Mario versus Donkey Kong, the original, for all the reasons I just stated, it makes complete sense. And that was, I was trying to tell people, when everybody was just about the game being announced last year, I was like, look, this has no bearing on anything. This is the reason. It's as an outsider, I can plainly see it's XYZ, and that doesn't mean anything for this project over here, or why they did this instead of that. So, yeah.
But yeah. And on that note of, well, maybe not that specific note, on the note of Nintendo from Up High encouraging studios to do integration of their most recent gimmicks, like full touchscreen integration, we talked a little bit about how Donkey Kong Plus was going to be making full use of the GBA link cable, which ultimately didn't pan out. But what they did make use of was the e-reader.
Oh, now you're talking my language. Okay, so...
Right? I fucking love that thing.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. You know this, our listeners know this. I love Nintendo devices that don't have a great reception for the mainstream opinion. I actually don't know what the read is on the e-reader, but I defend the Virtual Boy. Love the Virtual Boy, and
as one should.
I adore the Nintendo e-reader. I thought it was the greatest thing in an era where I didn't like much coming from Nintendo, or at least I was skeptical of it because of my biased lizard brain, choosing sides in the buyout. I adored the e-reader. I was like, holy shit, this is wonderful. And some of it is gimmicky. I mean, just the whole, you're going to swipe a bunch of cards and then I can play an NES game on the GBA. Convoluted, but it was just, the fact that the technology existed blew my mind back then. And, the e-reader did different things. For me, it was just I'm playing this classic game that I just bought on a deck of cards. What the hell? But
right, just such a wild concept, honestly.
Honestly, things like Mario Party E, I had a great affection for. Just a weird blending of physical card games and Game Boy Advance games. And then you had the e-reader cards that augmented existing GBA games.
Right. And also in the e-reader's favor, like previous Nintendo peripherals being showcased with Donkey Kong Jr. was like the showcase title that they advertised in commercials for the e-reader,
Yeah.
and we had a fully pre-rendered DK Jr. model featured in the commercials for this peripheral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like, again, Donkey Kong Jr. is used when it's used in a throwback capacity, and when they see fit to do it, and the e-reader was one of those times. But this game had e-reader support, but not the version that I played. That
maybe not the one you were expecting.
It only had e-reader support in the Japanese release, and this isn't one of those cases where, oh, if you can get your hands on the cards, it still works in the Western releases, the Western copies of this game. It was, in fact, just patched out. I think you can, like, hack into it. And...
yes and no.
Okay.
Like, you can hook the e-reader up to this game, and the levels are activated by cards, but the cards to activate them don't exist.
Okay.
They changed the activation codes for the Western release.
Okay, that's how they did it.
And then cards just don't exist to activate them. That still works in the Japanese version, but like even then, it's kind of hard to do because like, whereas most e-reader games, they'd sell you a pack of cards, and it would come in like a pack like Pokemon cards or baseball cards or whatever, and typically like the cards in that pack would be the full set you needed to scan to get the game or activate whatever you were doing in a game that had e-reader support. These were like event exclusives. They were handed out at special occasions, like they do legendary Pokemon rollouts these days. So like you'd have to pick them up at like a game showcase or a special event or a concert or whatever, and they only put out 10 of them. They released them over the course of a couple years at special events, and there's 2 levels that like they never even gave out the cards for whatever reason.
Jeez.
So like there's 10 people have access to, but there's 12 in the code.
And these levels that you can unlock, were they brought back in a Switch remake? Like,
you know what? That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Because you think
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I completely forgot these levels existed because, like, I can't play them on my physical copy of the game.
Right. Like,
so, like,
I've kind of memory hold this as well because I learned about this, and I was like, well, it doesn't apply to me, so I don't need to retain this information.
Yeah, very much sort of thing.
It's kind of a coping thing too, where it's like, well, I don't want to like come to terms with even a game I'm not fond of. I still want to have the full experience. And if I know, like, fans in Japan can have a fuller experience than I can, although very limited considering how they distributed these cards, like, I imagine it's even more frustrating to know that these cards exist and that they can unlock these levels in your game, but you have to basically go to such great lengths, move heaven and earth, to get these cards. That would be worse than just knowing you can't use them at all.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we did luck out, but it is something that I feel... I wish more DKU games utilize the e-reader. Mario Party E, I'm thankful exists, but you look at like Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Brothers 3, all-time great name for a game, but it actually had just so much e-reader support. And
which they activated all of it in the NSO release of the game.
Yeah. So,
I just looked it up. The e-reader levels are not in the remake.
That's maddening. All right, point against the remake's favor. But I
wonder if just NST didn't have access to the levels either.
Yeah, perhaps. I think that I would really just love so many more games if they used the e-reader. Like, I think about the Donkey Kong Country remake trilogy. I look at this game and just wish like they went more all in on it. Again, it's the fallacy of any Nintendo peripheral, right? At some point, it just feels like Nintendo loses interest. And
yeah, looking at you, heart rate monitor.
And it's a shame because, yeah, I realized, like, you don't want to like gate all this content behind a peripheral, and if the peripheral doesn't sell what you're hoping it does, then they're quick to abandon stuff. But I'm still salty because I wanted that 64 disk drive.
Right. I wanted that 64 disk drive. I wanted those Zelda games and F-Zero games and Mario artist games. Like,
yeah.
I wanted the BSX. I wanted to play all that like satellite radio video game stuff.
Yeah.
I want all of it. I want all of it.
And at the very least, we live in a world now where it's not so gated based on region. But
yeah, but at the same time, people just don't make peripherals for their consoles anymore.
I mean, yeah, the problem is having both a console and handheld in one system.
Actually, never mind. We did have Labo earlier.
We did, but
generation.
having the handheld and console in one system, I really feel like limits the inventive fun of having like parallel Nintendo systems where you could just have all these peripherals, some peripherals that like united them together, like the Super Game Boy. And
you know what? We Ring Fit also did the peripheral thing. Never mind, I'm full of shit. They're still doing
it, but it feels different than it used to. And maybe it's just me
it does.
Getting older,
it does feel different.
Yeah.
They don't bust out the Nintendo bicycle add-on anymore for these sorts of things.
While I have you here, I do have a question. And it's something I brought up, I think, so many times when the remake came out. It's about baddies in this game, particularly the baddie known as Brickman.
You know what? I love Brickman and I love Dustman, and I suspect your question is going to be about one of the things I love about them.
Well, my question that I've brought up again and again and again since February of this year is Brickman. Now, Brickman, for those who don't know, it's a pile of bricks, and from within a pile of bricks, you see a set of eyes, and then bricks fall from the pile or get tossed at Mario. And so my question is, coming from the rare side of things, and now Platonic, I'm kind of weaned to associate eyes on what would otherwise be an inanimate lump. I'm like, oh, that's just a googly-eyed, like,
a googly-eyed pile of bricks.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, like, based on all the freaks I've seen in rare and Platonic games. But then another part of me is like, wait a second. I think I think my reference is called Brickman, right? And so I just think, what would a man be doing in a pile of bricks? And so in my mind, he's naked and pleasuring himself because men are gross. And so I'm like, is Brickman just a man in a pile of bricks? And that's just his preferred state of being. And I felt inequipped to answer this. Dustin was kind of put on the spot. So you are the expert, and I want you to help settle this. What is Brickman?
I lean towards it's something in the pile of bricks, not necessarily a man. As I mentioned, there's the other enemy, Dustman, which is like a garbage can that can get up and walk around and has a little pair of eyes peeking out. Mm-hmm. That's sort of a similar concept.
Yeah.
But I personally think it kind of goes back to the same sort of ethos as the question of what's behind a Shy Guy's mask? Which personally I think is a trick question, because Shy Guys were created for the original version of Super Mario Bros. 2, which was a tie-in game for a Mystic Mask Festival. So the answer to the trick question is Shy Guys are the mask, and they're just wearing a body instead.
Okay, but is Brickman a man in the bricks, or is it
okay, what I was getting at with that is I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think it is, like, the whole package is the pile of bricks with the eyes peeking out from it. It doesn't like that is the entity
No,
conceptually.
no, I want to know the reason. I want to know why there exists, how Donkey Kong came to be associated with these deviants hiding in building materials. I want to know. Okay, this is the difference between our brains, right? And you just accept that there are these
I
brick
just
men.
roll with it.
And I'm just like no.
In my mind, it's the same answer as the question of where the heck do all these barrels come from. It's sort of that like working collar construction site atmosphere that the original had. Yeah, there's just like a dude in a pile of bricks. If you do like of the two options you presented, I would prefer the guy in a pile of bricks rather than a sentient pile of bricks. Yeah, it's funnier. It's got that sort of cartoon, old black and white Mickey Mouse logic to it.
Popeye, even we'll say
and Popeye,
yeah.
And there's a pile of bricks lying around because construction stuff, or like there's a trash can around because this was kind of concepted in the era where they still had like trash cans on streets, and you were like allowed to participate in the environment like that. And so it's very like, it just fits with the vibe, you know? Also, it's less weird to think about a guy hucking bricks from the pile he's hiding in than like, wait, is that anthropomorphic pile of bricks like throwing parts of itself at me? Does it hurt when it does that? Like, yeah,
I mean,
I don't actually want to think about that a whole lot.
We're all shedding skin constantly. I mean, we're all
That's
doing
true.
Skin and hair.
But again, I don't want to think about it too much.
Skin, hair, and fluids. We just seeps out of us constantly.
Like porcupine quills, except they're bricks.
Yeah, but no, I think my personal interpretation of it is that Donkey Kong, in his madness, however you want to define the origins of said madness, not his natural state of being, like saw fit to align himself with those on the margins of society, perhaps escaped convicts, perhaps I don't know, people that the society that's lifted up Mario so he can own a toy factory have forgotten, and there's no social safety net for them. So Donkey Kong was like, I want you to help me, man lying in a pile of bricks. Help me chuck bricks at your enemy, Mario, the symbol.
It's kind of interesting how Mario goes from like the emblematic like blue collar everyman to being the one that owns the factories.
Right. No, Mario has become everything he once railed against, and yet
no wonder he's so miserable in this series.
And yet I'm sure that the man lying in the pile of bricks looks at Mario, and if a factory fell in his pile of bricks, he would become just as heinous as Mario. It's the vicious cycle of success.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for clearing that up, I guess. I don't...
Sure. No problem. Glad I could explain that.
We do have a call to take.
We do.
Somebody called in. Spoilers. It's Traveler of the Stars, because of course they called in. They're on a streak right now, and I don't think they want to break the streak. So we will play Traveler of the Stars call, and then we'll wrap this up for now, because I really don't have anything else to really say about Mario versus Donkey Kong. But I will speak to where I am with this game in 2024 versus where I was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. We'll compare notes, and we'll see if I have turned over a new leaf, just like Brickman hopefully has done in the past 20 years.
Hyle, Gibbon, this is everyone's favorite caller, Traveler of the Stars here. Gibbon, you're looking radiant, looking beautiful as ever. Hyle, if I was watching the TV in my house and, a mini Hyle toy came on screen, I'd be hypnotized by corporate branding and go to my nearest store and burgle all of them and go on top of a building to thwart the authorities from getting me. Anyway, Mario versus Donkey Kong. Yeah, so I mentioned many times before, like, the games that I've grown up with, like Jungle Climber and, like, Returns, but, like, also, obviously, I grew up with a lot of Mario games, and I love Mario. And I also grew up with, I think it was Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2, March of the Minis, or I think it was actually Miniland Mayhem, because I was on the DS with the yellow cover. And I always thought they were kind of cool, like little puzzle platformers, but I never really, pay much mind to them, like they weren't like groundbreaking experiences. And so for this one, I immediately picked up the remake and I picked up the GBA one. But for me, I think that the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong kind of carrying the torch of Donkey Kong 94, which again never played. I do think it has a place in modern Nintendo just because, you know, carrying that lineage of the arcade DK, which, you know, was instrumental for Donkey Kong Country, whether or not it, you know, how much inspiration it took from that, like there wouldn't be Donkey Kong Country without Donkey Kong. Obviously it can kind of hurt without like actual Donkey Kong Country games. And I know, like, you know, with DK being a hero, it is sort of at odds with, like, how do we pin Mario, who's also a hero, against Donkey Kong? Like, how do you do that? So I do think if Nintendo wants to carry forth the series, they may, I don't know, have to look into that. Because, like, on the one hand, you're like, oh, Donkey Kong, like, maybe we could put him under mind control. But it's like, well, we don't want him to be, like, an idiot or anything. So I don't know. I guess the main thing is, I think it is cool, given that you are, like, the Mario versus Donkey Kong, like, big fan of it, because, like, again, I wouldn't say they're, like, amazing games, but, so, like, they're not really talked about usually, so it's just, I don't know, cool that you like them so much. And, yeah, Hyle, can you make me Hyle figure? I would like to buy it, or steal it, or, you know, whatever, just make them already. Alright, see you.
Oh, well, thank you for the call, Traveler of the Stars. I can't make
Amazing.
a mini Hyle figure because I have to make the, both the Stinky Ape Summer shirt, and Freezer did find the name for the, Southern Hemisphere equivalent name, and it is Well-Groomed New World Monkey Winter, and I have to make that shirt as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, too busy right now.
I bet we could. I bet we could commission someone to 3D model it and then find like a 3D print for hire shop or something.
That's weird.
And we're only going to sell like 3 of them anyway, so we'd only have to do one batch.
Those like big internet personalities, they get like toys made out of them. I find that weird.
Remember when everyone had bobbleheads?
I do. I remember.
Like you could just, I guess now it'd be Funko Pop. Can we get a Hyle Funko Pop?
Yeah, no, that's weird. I find it weird. Like I should not be the brand. I'm just one component of DK Vine. But I thank you for your enthusiasm nonetheless, Traveler of the Stars. Don't be going robbing any factories now.
Now. Unless they really deserve it.
To your point, and this actually helps cue us up for our final thoughts. Traveler's point about how Donkey Kong being the outright villain, it's not really something they should be doing or they should rethink it, but they did kind of immediately start to pivot as the series went on.
Yeah, so starting with the second game where Pauline comes back, DK is presented as an antagonist to begin with, and Mario is like, oh shit, DK's loose doing his thing again, and goes off to confront him. But it turns out at the end of the game that like Pauline actually hired DK to be like security and a tester at the factory because, spoilers for later games, I guess, Pauline's the one funding the toy companies. She's the one giving Mario all this investment capital. And I guess she has a say in the staffing because she's hired DK to be on staff.
How did he pass the security clearance? Because he has this big blight on his record called Mario vs. Donkey Kong.
But like, yeah, DK's just trying to do his job, and Mario shows up, doesn't even know enough about his own company to realize that DK's on staff, and just assumes he's up to no good and starts chasing him. this becomes such a trope that one of the more recent games in the series, the plot is Pauline is trying to throw a surprise birthday party for Mario, and to keep him occupied, she literally just has DK run in front of him because she knows Mario's such a prejudiced piece of shit that he'll just chase DK for the whole day.
And yeah, I like bring this up in the DKU lore tour video, how like, yeah, later entries effectively are like, oh, just a prank, bro. Like, gotcha. Like, we're
no, not even that. It's literally just DK trying to go about his day as an employee of Mario Toys Co. Limited or whatever, and Mario going, the fuck is this guy doing here?
I do want... what was that voice?
God, I don't know.
I was like, that wasn't Chris Pratt. That wasn't Bob Hoskins. That kind of maybe Captain Lou, a little bit of Captain Lou in there, but yeah, I wonder how much of Donkey Kong is the core antagonist is rooted in its origins as Donkey Kong Plus, like pre-buyout origins.
I would say a lot, considering, and even Nintendo realizes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because like I was saying, shortly before they just dropped the Mario vs. Donkey Kong branding completely and went with Mini Mario and Friends, they were already pivoting to Mario and Donkey Kong branding.
Yeah.
Although that didn't end up sticking. But like, they knew it didn't make sense.
Oh, especially once Donkey Kong Country Returns came out, and that was kind of locked in as the look and like visual but also thematic identity of Donkey Kong going forward. Like Donkey Kong Country, outside of specific like arcade merchandise and memorabilia, like Donkey Kong Country is effectively the Donkey Kong brand as far as just the shorthand, like Donkey Kong, here's Donkey Kong. And like the arcade stuff will always be celebrated and held up, but it's not necessarily this tug of war anymore.
It's not the main identity of the series.
Right. And as you said, as the series evolved, they did get away from Donkey Kong being an outright villain to it being misunderstandings that honestly fall more on Mario being a piece of shit than Donkey Kong.
Oh, 100%.
But also just the way Nintendo promoted the remake. And I don't know if you noticed this, but
I did.
They really went out of their way to portray... Because when the original came out, they were like, you know, the rivalry is back on. Donkey Kong is fighting Mario.
And Mario is very antagonistic to DK in the original. Like, there's sound bites of him calling DK like a dumb monkey and laughing at him and stuff, and none of that's in the remake.
And of course, Charles Martinet, I mean, he did the Mario voice, and it was just shocking to see to hear his Mario get so vile and get so like mean-spirited. And I know Cameron spoke to this, like how kind of refreshing it was to hear Charles Martinet like get down in the muck a little bit and be less of this like corporate mascot personality for Mario. But at the same time, it really like, it was like, oh, Mario, no, what are you doing? And you know, I say that as somebody who generally tries to view Mario as the villain in any Kong confrontation. But it's also tongue-in-cheek because I know, like, Mario's a hero. But
he is a hero, but, like, I think heroes having faults makes for richer character.
Sure.
Overall.
Sure.
So, like, yeah, I'm a hero, and I can work with DK when the time calls for it. But, man, I don't like that guy.
Well, yeah,
Sorta.
The promotion for the remake was they're frenemies. Like, that is the word they used. And, of course, that is coming out of the Super Mario Brothers movie, which is how they were portrayed as a friendly rivalry where maybe Donkey Kong doesn't really like Mario, but they still find common ground and work together because ultimately they are both good people. And
yeah, it was a very good portrayal of their interpersonal relationship. I think.
And Nintendo definitely wants to keep that locked in because they don't want people thinking Donkey Kong's a villain. What with this multi-million-dollar theme park in Osaka and Orlando?
Yeah.
What with the new direction or the persisting direction for the franchise? And they're having a lot invested in it. And so, yeah, it feels night and day perception-wise from how it felt to me 20 years ago. And of course, a lot has changed. In addition to that, where I have grown as a person, I have had 2 decades of life experience behind me, and I can come at this stuff with a little bit more nuance and perspective than I could back in 2004. But it is also being portrayed vastly different from the corporate overlords as well. So, getting to experience Mario vs. Donkey Kong again in a different context earlier this year, and like sitting down with it on the Switch, it did allow me to unclench just a little bit my very tight, puckered asshole, and I was finally able to kind of take a step back, and I said I like to put myself in the shoes of other fans, and I could finally do that a bit, put my feet in your shoes, Gibbon, and kind of see what you see in it, and that it's a very charming puzzle platformer. And it's not necessarily what I go for or reach for all the time. It's not my go-to comfort genre, and it's definitely not my favorite portrayal of Donkey Kong. It's weighted too heavily in Mario's favor, both in aesthetics and just story for my liking. But I can see its charms. I can be won over, at the very least, to see how well designed it is. And I can say, okay, that's a good game. It's just really not for me. And that's okay. That is okay. You don't have to like everything. And it's not a matter of, that's not for me, therefore I hate it, and it is bad. It's just, okay, that's not for me. It's good that it exists, though. And hopefully that's the trajectory we're all on in our existence, where we can get to that point where we become a little bit less egocentric and realize, hey, multiple interpretations of this thing that I like can exist simultaneously, and it doesn't mean that they're taking away this other thing. So that's where I am with Mario vs. Donkey Kong in 2024.
Yeah, I don't know. My views on this game really haven't changed much. I still like it. It's still great. The remake is mostly better, although there were a couple things I think it could have done better. It's still beloved. I still have my original GBA copy that I have played more recently than I imagine Hyle has. But yeah, well said. Multiple interpretations. You know what? On that note of interpretations of things, I know one thing that we haven't brought up yet that I used to get in arguments with various DK Vine people back in the day was where this comes in the Donkey Kong timeline and the interpretation of whether this is the modern DK as he looks like, or like the classic DK with just a homogenized look like we were going into earlier.
Shut up, Gibbon.
Oh.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.